Welcome everyone to another edition of the NALHE Talks Policy, our vlog video podcast on healthcare policy issues. Today we're joined by a great group of panelists who are going to talk about healthcare education and barriers to access to healthcare education and healthcare staffing. I would like to start off with a disclaimer that this podcast and all the views expressed and opinions are not intended to constitute legal advice and does not represent the views or opinions of any of the participants' respective law firms, businesses, or educational institutions. And now I'd like to introduce you to our great panel today. So we're going to go ahead and pass it around the room here and let everybody introduce themselves and kind of what they do. So we'll go ahead and start to my right here with Rufino.
Hi, I'm Rufino Gaitan. I am an attorney, senior counsel here at Hush Blackwell, based out of our Houston office. My practice focuses on labor and employment matters, including health and safety issues and collective bargaining issues. I've been practicing for a little over 14 years, and I'm happy to be here and join all of you.
Thanks, Rufino. We'll pass it over to Cesar Lopez.
Hey, everybody. My name is Cesar Lopez. I am the Associate General Counsel at the Texas Hospital Association in Austin, Texas. We represent about 490 or so member hospitals across the entire state of Texas. So we deal with a range of issues, not just healthcare, but mostly healthcare, but all kinds of other issues. Also been practicing just over 14 years, about 7 of them here in Austin. Before that, I was in private practice at a litigation firm down in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. So happy to be here with you all, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Cesar. Next, I'd like to introduce Jesus Adame.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? My name is Jesus Adame, and I'm the founder of a company by the name of Icon Health Services, and we are a nursing agency, and we actively recruit nursing professionals in Mexico and Central America, and just happy to be here.
Thanks, Jesus. Glad to have you. Next, let's introduce Diana Cadillo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Cadillo. I am the current president of the NALHE Denver Metro chapter, and I'm a public health professional and do public health policy. I sit in the intersectionality of disability and race and poverty.
Thanks, Diana. Glad to have you. And next, Jeffrey Weede. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hey, so my name is Jeffrey. I'm the academic director over here at the University of Denver for the Health Informatics program. Also have experience within healthcare as a director, project manager, and process improvement facilitator. So glad to be here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeffrey. Glad to have you. And my name is Dominic Castillo. I'm an associate attorney here at Hush Blackwell. I work as a healthcare regulatory attorney, and I serve as the NALHE Talks policy moderator. Here, I'm going to ask some questions and have a conversation with these wonderful group of folks about healthcare education. To that end, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the impetus that has led to us wanting to discuss these issues. Latino and Black students borrowed a disproportionate amount of student loans compared to white students. Nearly 72% of Hispanic students take out loans to attend college, and of these borrowers, 83% maintained this debt after 12 years from graduation. The recent promise of student loan forgiveness brought more than a glimmer of hope to some Latino borrowers when it was reported that approximately half of all Hispanic student loan borrowers would have their entire debt forgiven. This would have had a significant impact on Hispanic workers. But with the recent Supreme Court determinations in the Department of Education versus Brown and Biden versus Nebraska, the High Court held that the authority relied upon to effect such forgiveness was insufficient, and this was struck down. I'd like to turn to Cesar Lopez really quickly to kind of give us a high-level overview of the case and kind of what the state of the law is with respect to student loan forgiveness.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. And so you kind of already went down this path, but this was a very significant ruling by the Supreme Court of the U.S. So just to give some background, President Biden's plan would have, and again, this is very general, but would have canceled up to $20,000 of student loan debt for low-income students who obtained Pell Grants and up to $10,000 for the majority of other borrowers. Significant amount of money for folks. Potentially would have affected up to 43 million individuals. So when we talk about a significant population that this decision affected, that's a huge number. So as you mentioned, the court decided that the authority behind that plan was insufficient. The authority that the administration cited is an act called the HEROES Act. This was an act that was enacted after 9/11 and it essentially allowed the department, the secretary, to just in general alleviate hardship for student loan borrowers that result from a national emergency. So again, this came into effect after 9/11. What was that, 22 years ago or so? Still in effect. And so as a result of COVID, folks started to look at this act and start to provide relief for individuals as a result. So in fact, this was the same act cited by the prior administration under President Trump to freeze student loan interest payments and things like that back during the height of the COVID pandemic. So the Supreme Court, again, obviously did strike that down, saying that the HEROES Act here was not sufficient basis for this type of a change in the policy. There's some very interesting kind of legal wonky issues. Again, I know that's outside the scope of this discussion, but really, if somebody really digs into this and kind of sees what the court did here, there's some issues dealing with standing. Of course, there were a couple of states that sued in the name of the state to stop this regulation from taking effect, and whether or not they actually did have standing, didn't. It's again kind of wonky but interesting issues. But basically, the Supreme Court held that the department, under the HEROES Act, does have the ability to make some adjustments, maybe even modest adjustments to the student loan repayment program, but they do not have the authority to use that act to transform and rewrite the regulation. So again, getting into some of these wonky issues, or just at least touching on them, the court basically said that if Congress didn't give the agency, the department, the right to do something, if Congress was not crystal clear in that you have the ability to do X, Y, or Z, we shouldn't assume that the department, the agency, or the secretary has the ability to do that. So basically, going back to Dominic, as you said, there wasn't enough kind of meat on the bone there for the court to take that issue, and they basically came back and said, you've exceeded your authority, secretary, and we're going to go ahead and strike down this proposed plan.
Thank you, Cesar, for that brief synopsis of the law. Part of this, this discussion, this was the foundation of what we wanted to talk about today, where we're going to compare and contrast kind of this student loan issue that affects people entering the health or entering education generally, people going to school generally, and we want to compare that against the backdrop of the growing national healthcare staffing shortage. In the wake of the pandemic, the state of healthcare professionals isn't great. We've seen emergency departments so severely understaffed that an emergency nurse called 911 to request EMS to the emergency department that they were in. These shortages are not unique to the emergency departments. Many hospitals are faced with closing essential services because they simply do not have the staff to sufficiently man these beds. The pandemic highlighted the precarious situation of our healthcare system and how even a little pressure can overwhelm an already strained system. Many staff have exited the industry as a result of the pandemic. Those who have remained are unhappy, and as we've seen with the recent strikes, they're demanding more support. They're demanding more recognition and more money. And some of that, rightly so. And when the hospitals are faced with some of these tough decisions to close services, it's always hire more nurses, but it's not so simple, as it takes years to develop a healthcare professional. It takes a lot of education and a lot of money. And encouraging young, diverse students to pursue a career in healthcare can prove challenging, particularly when the prospect of borrowing substantial loans that they'll carry for at least 10 to 12 years of their practice make it undesirable to pursue those kinds of careers. So today I'm going to go ahead and turn to my panelists now and start sharing on some of these issues, talking about diversity and healthcare perspectives with respect to education. So I'd like to go ahead and turn to Jeff to share a little bit about the state of student enrollment in certain healthcare programs that you're seeing at your school and some of the diversity efforts that your school and you are part of.
Thanks, Dominic. So kind of leading off with some of the observations from my school, I'll give a little bit of information kind of nationwide when it comes to the diversity and demographics when it comes to Hispanic and Latinx students. So when we look at individuals in the child and young adult age range, we're looking at a shift of population from almost 16% back in 2000 to 25% in 2017. However, those numbers are not being kept as we go through different levels of education. At the undergraduate level, we're only at about 19% when it comes to Hispanic and Latinx undergraduate populations in 2016, and it's even significantly lower in graduate studies, which is about 9%. When you get into the healthcare diversity, it's even lower than that, with physicians and med school populations roughly around the 5% range, and those considered healthcare leaders, so directors and senior leaders within health organizations, being only about 2% of the population. So we're seeing a very drastic drop in the diversity rates as you start going up, especially the higher up roles within healthcare. And unfortunately, this is even what I see in my organization as well. I would say that it is a very small percentage, under 10%, that we're seeing in our graduate studies for Hispanic and Latinx populations for these kind of things. They're predominantly usually either white or Asian demographics that are coming in. And what I hear from colleagues, what I hear from individuals that are having trouble getting into the program or staying in the program is it's usually either a financial based burden, or some of them just don't understand the significance of these programs in their career trajectories. So not having those mentorships, like I said, only 2% of identified Hispanic and Latinx health care leaders in the organizations really plays a role in not having those mentors really showing the path of going through education. And then also, as Dominic and Cesar said, is when you're having significant financial debts coming up, most graduate studies are not grant based, so you're looking for scholarships or loans to do that, and with the risk of not having loans paid back, or the concern about having that return on investment, a lot of individuals do not press forward unless if they have some kind of a organization that is helping them pay for that schooling. So we're seeing that significant drop in that diversity, especially as we go up in higher levels of education.
So you're seeing a decrease in the students, the diverse students that are entering these programs. Is there anything that, from a policy perspective, your organization or the leaders are talking about, or ideas for solutions for recruitment and engagement?
Yeah, so some of the stuff that we're doing is working with various groups on how do we start to connect with those individuals. So one of the things that we do as an organization at University of Denver is we work with a wide variety of different professional organizations, NALHE being one of them, and trying to figure out how do we outreach to individuals that might be promising young early careers that want to continue growing, so we can try to find them opportunities for mentorship. They may not have the opportunity to necessarily go for a graduate study at the time. Are there other certificate programs or internships or fellowships that they're able to do? So we try to work on a lot of those things. I'm actually in two different organizations right now. One is working with community health systems within Haiti. Another one is working with Central and South America, and they're actually trying to do some stuff with vaccinations down like Nicaragua right now, where we're trying to get students involved with those different organizations and being able to highlight that, because we want to really show how these different career trajectories can go. Because a lot of times I think individuals, especially in a Hispanic Latinx background, may not have the career trajectory to actually want to go to maybe hospital administration. But there's so many things within healthcare you can do, whether it's working in nonprofit, public health, community health type settings. You want to go into an entrepreneur type role, or technology. You want to work in global type health program. So we're trying to work with a lot of different populations to show all the breadth of opportunities out there, so that way they really try to aspire to move forward in their ranks and then ultimately become mentors for future Hispanic and Latinx leaders. So
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's really good to hear, planting those seeds early and letting students know, these are the opportunities that are out there. To that end, I would ask maybe Deanna to share a little bit about, we talked about, earlier about preparing students even at younger levels, younger than recruiting for college, even like the elementary. Deanna, is there anything going on at the local levels that you're seeing, maybe in Denver and Colorado, generally trying to help younger students, elementary, high school students, consider healthcare jobs?
No, that's a great question. So I think that as a public health professional, I always like to kind of upstream the conversation. And when we look at what are some of the metrics by which we see students showing up in college or graduate school, that really kind of goes all the way back to those early childhood experiences with preschool and elementary school. So here in Colorado, we've got a universal preschool program that is being initiated. There are 4 other states that have similar programs. The glitch in that is that it's about 10 hours a week, and if you're a parent who's struggling, 10 hours for your little ones isn't quite enough, but it's a start. So really looking at how we can kind of support families. So whether that's with preschool, that's with universal childcare, and I would just say that the childcare conversation is a very broad one that we could certainly have, right? I mean, we've been talking about this since the 60s and 70s when there was a comprehensive child care act that was almost squeaked across the line in 1971. All that to say is, yes, there are many conversations being had, but I would just like to go back to what Jeff was talking about in terms of career trajectories, because when we think about students and the amount of debt that they're going to accrue, we also need to be very mindful of the pay gap. And so when we look at those kinds of things, and we're telling students, especially students of color, to go into these professions and they're going to take on an enormous amount of debt, they're also thinking about, well, am I going to get paid an equivalent component to my white counterparts? And we just need to be very honest about those conversations and try to figure out how we can kind of fix those things to then incentivize students of color to go into those professions, take on some of that debt, understanding and appreciating that there will be some equity in pay. So whether we're talking about race or whether we're talking about gender, when we kind of get further on in the conversation about what are some calls to action, that would definitely be part of that conversation. So that's what I would say on those pieces.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very helpful. And I'm the president of the Austin or Central Texas chapter of NALHE, and one of our goals in the future is to start reaching out and offering some type of programming at the elementary and high school levels, doing career day type of activities, because you don't know what you don't know, right? The idea of being a healthcare administrator may seem so foreign. What does that really mean? And how do I get there? How do I become, do something like as a compliance officer or as a human resources individual or as some type of recruiter for staffing? All that requires, getting an education, starting at, undergrad, and then maybe looking at that type business, MHA, MBA type programs. But if you're not aware of them, you may think, oh, well, that's not really available to me. In addition, the cost of going to school, people are intimidated. That's a huge barrier. We were talking a little bit about workforce too. That there's 5 generations of workforce and the aging out of workforce. Do you see any kind of policy shift or calls to action maybe? And I know we'll talk a little more later on that, but things that maybe you're doing with your chapter or that you've seen with other chapters in that space for recruitment or encouraging young students to go into healthcare jobs?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I was just recently at a conference and we were having this conversation from the human resource perspective, right? So how can we create jobs and create environments that are attractive to those specific generations, right? Because everybody kind of has a different impetus for wanting to go into specific professions and things that will keep them there, right? Because this work is challenging and we just need to be very honest about it. And so how can we kind of feed their souls to kind of keep them actively engaged and grow their professions? Because we certainly don't want to see an enormous amount of turnover from an HR perspective, from a patient care perspective, right? We want people to be able to grow their skill sets and really have some of that historic knowledge within the context of their profession so that they can truly be effective and efficient. So that when we have major crises like the public health emergency that we're coming out of, that we've got people who are there, who are knowledgeable and skilled and kind of can steer the ship and keep the course steady for their staff. So I would say that those conversations are definitely being had. We need to be very cognizant, and I think Jesus will probably speak to this more than I, about the shifting demographic, right? Because we do have an aging population. Who are going to require higher levels of healthcare. And we're going to need individuals to be able to provide that healthcare. And so where are those individuals going to come from? And so I will leave that to other colleagues to speak to, but we need to be very mindful of, who are they and how can we keep them engaged and support them in their goals.
Right, right. That's very important. You know, the diversity piece of looking at, oh, we have a population group, a younger population group in these minority groups, Hispanics and other groups where there is a young population where that are looking for opportunities and jobs to improve themselves. The other important thing I'd like to just kind of point out is how important diversity is in representation in the healthcare space, in the leadership, in the clinicians, our nurses and doctors. And you know, we've heard a couple of stories like in the past. Our NALHE chapter held a Southwest panel on mental health, and they were talking about how in an emergency room there was a lady that came in very agitated. They were going to call in psych. She just wouldn't respond to them when they were talking to her. And one of the nurses knew that she was of the Muslim faith, and the nurse was also of Muslim faith. And this was during Ramadan. And she said, well, she may not have eaten. It's now nighttime. Let's give her a tray and see what that helps. They gave her the tray. She ate and was totally calm. Like after that, she was compliant. She was able to get a $5 tray, saved all those referrals, you know, a visit from psych. And that diverse nurse was able to deliver quality care. And that's the kind of, I'd like to segue to talk about staffing, you know, about how healthcare education, the importance of diversity, but really kind of the state of where we're at. You know, that there's a lot of services are experiencing these staffing shortages. So I'd like to kind of just ask Rufino, you know, he works in this space quite a bit, and just what you're seeing out in the community, maybe with your clients, how they're recruiting tactics, things you're kind of experiencing.
Yeah, so you know, I think overall in the workforce currently, there is a shortage of workers, and I think that we've all heard reports about that. But it's very critical in the healthcare space in particular, mostly because you know it's very skilled work, right? Everything from even your cleaning technicians or janitorial staff at a hospital, for example, they have specialized training on how to disinfect an operating room after a surgery, how to just clean up a patient room where you know it was just a simple procedure and the bed was used. All of those things are not something where you can just pluck somebody right off the street. And so there's a lot of training that goes into you know getting the right skill set for everybody within a healthcare setting. And so that's creating a lot of challenges for employers and for hospital systems in general, particularly with nurses. I think the COVID-19 pandemic had a really drastic impact on the nursing labor pool, and whether it was nurses that were very experienced who just decided they were going to retire and leave the workforce altogether, you know, those folks leaving at a higher rate than we could replace them because of, again, the training requirements that go into becoming a nurse, right? It's a lot of schooling. It takes time to actually replenish that labor pool. So some of the things that you know, some of my clients are doing are, you know, they're trying to be very targeted with their recruitment efforts. But in that process, there's only so much that you can actually do. You know, like you said, Dominic, you know, a lot of times people just think, well, why don't they just hire more nurses? And that is certainly a solution to the shortage of nurses in hospital settings and elsewhere. But where do we get them, right? If they're not there to hire, even if we're throwing money at this problem, you're still not going to get an applicant to actually click, I apply for this job. So things like looking across border, right? Across the border for international or foreign-born nurses. The problem, or one of the problems with that as a solution, is that it is a temporary solution. And even then, because of how drastic the shortage has been, particularly with nurses, there's also a bottleneck that's already being created in that process. And it is a very time-consuming process. So, you know, if you thought you were going to be able to hire 5 additional nurses who are foreign-born, you know, that process is taking longer because everybody else kind of had the same idea. And now they flooded this credentialing organization that has the ability to certify whether these folks have the proper training and experience. So it's a very challenging problem, and I think it's one that unfortunately we're going to see sort of a lagging indicator here, where by the time we start to kind of even things out, I guess the flip side of that could be that then we have too many nurses waiting for jobs that aren't there. I think we're a long way from there if we ever actually get there, but creating that balance by increasing the actual supply of medical professionals is really going to be a key component to addressing this problem.
Yeah, Rufino, you touch on a really interesting point. You talk about that there are certain solutions, and looking south of the border where there is a large number of workers that we could potentially draw from. I'd actually like to turn to Jesus to ask him to give his thoughts as some of the projects that he's working on. Share a little bit about those projects if you wouldn't mind, and then maybe kind of respond to the way what you're kind of seeing and what your goals and hopes are for some of the problems that Rufino addressed, and then just for the general healthcare shortage in general.
Yeah, for sure. Traditionally, more people are accustomed to bringing in nurses from other countries, such as the Philippines or Africa and stuff. And that process is typically through an EB-3 visa. Typically, that visa would take about 6 months if you were lucky. On the pandemic times, we were seeing 18 to 24 months. So obviously, that's a long time to bring somebody in. One of the things that we're seeing in regards to what's called the TN visa is with the agreement that US, Canada, and Mexico have, is that this visa is a lot quicker, right? However, one of the difficult things that we realized was that in Mexico, since we're talking south of the border, is that no one had actually developed this infrastructure, right? So the main thing that we were having an issue with was the English portion of the requirements to bring in a candidate, right? So what we did in Mexico, since we realized that this problem wasn't going away, and we don't know when another pandemic might happen, we decided to go develop the infrastructure for the English side and for the preparation for the NCLEX. So one thing that we've done is that we've actually teamed up with universities and now secretaries of labor in Mexico, and it's been a very, very fruitful relationship to the point now that whenever we go out and we speak to some of these universities, to some of their nursing students, that we've actually doubled their students that want to study nursing, right? So for example, one particular school, their average enrollment was about 450 students. Now they're up to 900 and something students. So they had to add more teachers, right? So we're already seeing the fruits of bringing somebody into the United States, and particularly Texas, and with the hopes of earning more money and also being able to send money back to their loved ones. Because obviously, as we know, that the TN visa only allows us to bring in that particular sponsor, and if they want to bring in their spouse, they could bring in their spouse and children under 21, right? So it allows them to send money back to Mexico and when remittance. And then also in the state on this side in Texas, the beautiful thing too is we can also offer nurses to continue their education, right? So they want to further in that education, and so now you have a beautiful thing that's happening here, right? And so we've had a lot of success. For example, we're actually going to be going down to meet with a couple of governors in the coming weeks, and then now we have the governor supporting us to bring in all their universities on board to go through the process of learning English, prepare for the NCLEX, having a sponsor, and then deploying them into the United States, and particularly Texas, right? So one thing that we've realized also here in Texas is a lack of visibility for nurses and where they're actually placed. I know with a lot of agencies, people are fighting; they don't want to share where people are. So that's kind of another segue into what we're doing with our technology is we're going to allow our nurses register, and we're going to be able to see people here in Texas where they're actually actively at, and try to deploy them to the closest, either on the home health side, closest home, or the closest hospital. In Mexico, we're doing the opposite approach. We want to identify where these nurses can actually service some of our actual tourists, Americans, Canadians, Europeans, but also create a pipeline of candidates that we can have a warm touch and reach out and say, hey, we have a great opportunity for you. Are you interested in coming to America? Here's what you can earn. Versus in Mexico, a lot of people don't realize this, but nurses are earning $3 an hour, in comparison. And, believe it or not, one of the biggest questions that I've received from students and nurses is, hey, Jesus, how many hours can I work? And I said, hey, typically in America, we work 36, 40 hours, but there's plenty of overtime. And they said, well, great, because over here I work 60 hours, 80 hours a week because I can't make it. I can't make it. So can you please help us? And we're like, Absolutely, man. There's plenty of work, and once you come to the United States, people are going to love you. People are going to cherish you. And another thing that I love about this program that we're doing is, it provides bilingual students, students that are hungry, students that are on a mission for something greater than themselves, and it provides diversity. So these are a lot of very very important things. And I know we talked about generations as well, and typically Latinos and Mexicans. I'm a Mexican-born citizen, and one thing that we do is we see our parents and we aspire to see what they're doing, so we follow in their footsteps. So those are all very very positive points. And typically Latinos by nature are very loving, very kind, soft-spoken. We care a lot. We want to make sure that we take care of your grandma. We want to make sure that we feed you, right? So these are all beneficial aspects that we're seeing, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, I find this model extremely interesting. I think it's one that hospitals and other healthcare providers that are facing these shortages should consider, because it seems like it's an immediate solution to some of the problems that we're having. Like it's a pipeline of ready workers. I would like to maybe just ask, like, even Cesar or Rufino what they think, and Jesus, feel free to also weigh in, and anybody else. Like, what about the healthcare kind of oversight? There are some standards that are a bit different. I know that they're going to take the NCLEX and conceivably try to get licensed by the state bodies, the Board of Nursing. What about like oversight and ensuring kind of there's some parity with their education and accreditation type of stuff? And is there any messaging, like for Cesar, is there any messaging kind of going out to your members about that? Or are they asking about that? Is it even being talked about? I don't know, but just kind of curious of your thoughts. And Rufino, too, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, to answer that last question, are they asking about it? Yeah, they're all talking about it. It's been an issue. It's been an issue for years now. There were a lot of really good points made here in the last half hour or so, and I'm going to see if I can try to connect a few dots here. So let's see how successful I am on that. But going back to talking about stuff on the national level, clearly there's a workforce shortage. It's not just nurses. We're talking about nurses. Nurses are getting all the love. I'm perfectly fine with that. THA is perfectly fine with that. But we know, our hospitals know, our members, our almost 500 member hospitals know it's not just nurses. But if having that discussion, having that dialogue, whether it's on the national or the state or the local level, is going to help improve things, we'll have that discussion, and we'll keep working on the other issues, on the techs, on the doctors, on the custodial staff, whatever it is. Everybody's short-staffed. I also think, and this is just from me having discussions with counterparts in other states, that part of the problem is also, you guys have already touched on this, but there's an imbalance of where everyone is. Now, you can talk about across international borders, but also state borders. I've had conversations with states up north, Minnesota, Washington, a few others, where they say, hey, we have a shortage of beds too, just like you in Texas. The problem in Texas is we have the beds, we have the brick and mortar, we have the locations in a lot of these areas. We just don't have the people to staff them. Now, I spoke with somebody in, I think it was Minnesota, who said, we have more nurses than we know what to do with. We just don't have enough brick and mortar, enough beds, and we can't build them fast enough, but we've got the people. So, there's an imbalance here, and that's just looking at it on the national level, and that's just anecdotally. So going back to the student loans, I don't know how the affordability of all of this is going to play into things. And what I mean by that is, could somebody, let's say, move from Texas to North Dakota or wherever to find that available job? Is it an affordability issue? So we know that student loans are supposed to, repayments are supposed to kick back in here in the next couple of weeks. I don't know how that's going to play out, but it's coming. I've read articles where folks are saying the system's going to be overwhelmed, and how is that going to play into things? The systems that are going to actually collect and service this debt are not going to be ready for this on switch to be turned back on after so many years. And then think about these students who graduated just before or during COVID. They've never made a student loan payment in their life. They don't even know what that looks like. So that's kind of working out there. The administration is going to take another shot at trying to provide some relief to borrowers. They're going to, we talked about the HEROES Act and how the Supreme Court said that's not going to fly here, but there's another act out there, the Higher Education Act, that President Biden and his team are looking to, and are going to just basically try to raise the minimum floor, the income level for those repayments. So if you make a higher amount of money now, that floor is going to be raised, and if you're below that higher floor, your payment may be zero. You may not have to pay any interest. It may be a situation where your loan is discharged after 10 or 20 years, depending on the loan. So a lot of stuff is going to come into play here in the next couple of weeks. We are having those conversations, and then just to give you an idea of something kind of local to Texas. We're working on it. We just finished our legislative session in May of this year. We meet every other year, so every odd numbered year. There was a bill here in Texas, Senate Bill 25. That's a pretty broad bill that addresses, again, we're talking about just the nursing workforce shortage in this case, but again, that's fantastic. We'll take it. Introduces things like grants, scholarships, opportunities to train nurses who are going to train other people, educators, because that's important. You've got to coach up these nurses and things like that. So some kind of changes that were made that folks might see as minor, like those scholarships, those grants are going to now be available to a nurse who's working part-time as opposed to just being full-time. That's a huge deal for a lot of people, and so again, just expanding those opportunities. We're putting money in the system. We're trying to generate the interest and help folks along. And so, yeah, folks are having that conversation. I think we're slowly but surely moving in the right direction. But like I said, there's just a lot of stuff, a lot of kind of dots that we need to connect here, and we're going to find out how all this plays out in the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, the physician piece is also a big part of it. The cost of going to medical school, your 4 years of undergrad, and then your 4 years of med school, and then 2 years of residency. And a lot of what I've seen, some of the social media posts from doctors in these graduate medical education programs, they're very expensive. Their loans are basically still running, still accruing, and they're maybe getting paid. They're working as doctors, but maybe getting paid $25,000-$30,000 a year, which is not much, while they're also borrowing a significant amount. So it's a great point that it's not just nurses, it's your mid-levels, it's your doctors, it's all across the board, and it doesn't seem like there are many solutions that we can implement. And I think the bigger point of the cost of attendance, it's is somebody more likely to go to school to become an RN, or they're going to become a doctor? When you look from a cost perspective, it's probably what's the opportunity cost? What am I giving up to get something? And if an RN can be pretty successful, a traveling RN can be very successful, and that might be the better route to go, as compared with when you're borrowing $200,000, $400,000, $500,000 to go to med school, to go to these schools, and it'd be cheaper just to do the 4-year RN program and make good money. So that's a really, really great point. I did want to just get real quick back to the kind of the oversight issue, and I don't know if you want to talk about it, Rufino, about I was curious about, as they bring in nurses, they get licensed, they're immigrants. What are some of the oversight issues? Are you even seeing anything like that?
Well, I think a lot of that, once a nurse is licensed in the state, then they can essentially practice that profession in any setting. The issue then really becomes one of supervision, right? And managing the employee and their expectations, making sure that they're meeting, patient needs and all of those other things. And this actually kind of dovetails a little bit with a point that Cesar made, which is, we're talking about a lot about going out and recruiting and trying to fill in that pipeline, but we also tend to forget that we also have a whole lot of people who are already in those jobs, right? And so retention kind of gets lost in the weeds sometimes. And when you look at a lot of the sort of pressure points in this labor market, a lot of it relates or revolves around issues of, I'm working way too many hours a lot of the time, but not always. It's I'm not making enough money for the work that I'm doing. I'm not getting sufficient training. I am being asked to do things that I don't really know how to do because there's nobody else around to actually do these tasks. So when we're talking about, compliance issues, or just making sure that people are properly trained and doing their job right, I think it is very important for employers not to lose sight of the role they play in that part of the process. Are you training people properly? Are you making sure that they're not just exhausted? And I get that that's very difficult balance to try to find, but it is one that employers would do well to at least consider the issues, think about them, and try to figure out if within their own workplaces, in their circumstances, there might be some solution to address, the employee exhaustion issues, the lack of training, and all of those other things that do lead people to just call it quits, and it exacerbates the problem of not having sufficient staff when you're losing the ones that you already have.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's interesting too. It made me think of an article I read recently about some of the recruiting tactics that I'd seen in the healthcare space, where they are kind of like recruiting these younger nurses to kind of move up here to wherever we are, start working. They pay for their housing, they pay for whatever their onboarding stuff, and then they're kind of committed. They're committed to these contracts. What is your perspective on that? And as you see, because what happens is the nurse can't leave. They're basically, or if they leave, they owe the hospital money. And it's like, well, what happens if you go and you like, I don't really like living here, or this is not for me, or this is maybe not, the type of work I want to do. With your young nurse, your young practitioner, you're kind of still learning that stuff. Like, where's the best place for me? What is my practice going to look like? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's that scenario has definitely occurred and sort of recurred over the last several years, where the enticements are so good that people just kind of go and follow the money, and then they realize that there are probably quite a few strings attached to those dollars. So I do think that to avoid issues, same thing. I don't think employers should induce people to take on these obligations without being very clear and explicit about what the expectations are, right? If we're going to move you to use the example that Cesar used, from Texas to North Dakota, and we're paying for those relocation expenses, the employee needs to understand that if you're telling them, if you leave within a year, for example, you're going to have to repay us those relocation expenses. That needs to be made clear to the employee so that they understand what they're getting into. Because, if the employee just isn't careful and they sign that contract without realizing all of those strings or conditions, then it's not going to make for a very fruitful relationship to begin with. If an employee is staying simply because they want to stick out that term, are you really going to be getting the best performance from that particular employee? So there's a lot of those sort of employee morale and employee relations issues that come into play, where even if you've got the law and the contract language on your side, does it really make sense to hold that over the individual? Or would both parties be better served by just ending the relationship and trying to start over?
Yeah, no, that's great. And that leads me to my next question for Jesus. Is there an approach that your group is kind of taking with respect to expectations? I know you're still kind of earlier in the process, but have you all thought about expectations when you're bringing them over, and if there's any type of contractual agreement between these employees and what it's going to look like when they come, and expectations from you as an employer, as a pipeline?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously, one of the things that we try to do is we try to get the candidates to stay with us for about 3 years, right? So what we do is we bring them here on a work permit, and then once they finish the second year, then we transfer that work permit into a adjustment of status, right, to a green card, and that's essentially what we're trying to accomplish, right? A lot of the students that we speak to is, we say, hey, look, if you're in it for the money, tell us up front. If you're in it for adjustment of status, tell us up front, so we can know how to best get you taken care of, right? And not only that, but part of the benefit of what we're doing is bringing it into the home health setting is if a student doesn't do well in the hospital setting, we always absorb that student back, or that nurse back, to our home health setting. And we want to make sure that if it's too fast paced, whether it's an emergency room, ICU, intensive care, we want to bring that individual back and then get them acclimated to the American way and how things are. And that way we're able to best suit both sides, right? Because like you said, we want to make sure that that person is happy. We want to make sure that that person is taken care of and they're doing a good job and taking care of their patients. Because if they're not, it doesn't make sense to keep that person tied here, right? And that's also leads into our strategy of deploying our technology in Mexico, because if they go back to Mexico, they can still work with our technology. They can still work and provide those services. Now they learned English. Now they can actually provide services to tourists wherever they go, whether that's Cabo, whether that's Merida, whether that's Cancun. So we've thought about those pieces as well.
That's great. That's great, and I think that's really important to manage those expectations because they're workers entering the workforce. They are coming into the country, the new, learning a new language. It can be very challenging, even though they're not going very far geographically. It can be very like a totally different world. I'd like to segue now kind of to just policy perspectives and thinking about calls to action. And I'm kind of opening it up to the room generally and share ideas on what you think. Our membership who watches these programs are healthcare executives. They're Hispanic healthcare executives. They can make decisions for hiring or policy. What would you kind of suggest or what would you encourage when it comes to thinking about hiring, thinking about education, thinking about ways we can do things as executives? And if you're NALHE members, which we all are, how we can in our chapters can do things. So I'd like to just kind of go around the room a little bit. I guess I'll call on people so it's not a little awkward. Deanna, do you want to go first and share a little bit what you think?
Sure. Just kind of going back to the points I was making earlier, I think the earlier we get involved, the better. So any opportunities we have to get involved with mentoring middle school, high school, undergraduate students, I think is a wonderful opportunity. And within the context of large healthcare systems, any opportunities you have to start to onboard those individuals. So if that is, starting individuals as volunteers or creating positions for them within your organization so that they can kind of become acclimated to those settings and start to see, what are all the different possibilities and different fields that they could kind of get curious about. Because I think somebody mentioned it earlier, right? You look around the room and you say, I don't know, what do people who look like me become when they grow up? And so kind of giving them those opportunities. And then I would just say, from a human resource perspective, have those conversations with HR about closing that pay gap. Because I think, we can certainly do a lot on our end to make sure that there's equity within those pieces, whether that's gender equity or race and ethnicity equity or country of origin equity. But I think we need to kind of use our collective levers to make those things happen so that we can kind of stand with our head held high and say, this is something that we believe in. We're going to put dollars towards it.
Great, thank you. Jeff, would you like to share anything on from the education perspective on things that other professors or educators or even leadership at schools and universities can do to help with these high rising costs and things to think about when we're trying to recruit and educate diverse populations?
Yeah, I think one of the big things too is looking at how you can do agreements with individuals that might be coming into new roles. Unfortunately, one of the things too that we've seen, especially getting into healthcare leadership or certain type of roles, is there's a lot of educational requirements that go into there. So there's already kind of this, what we used to call a paper ceiling to a lot of folks that they're needing to break through getting certain educational requirements to get there. So having individuals or organizations sometimes sponsor tuition assistance or some kind of a grant partnership or agreement, kind of similar to what others have been saying. It might be an agreement that, hey, we will help pay for your educational needs, and you're going to guarantee X amount of time in a role or with the organization. A lot of organizations that I see are successful in getting a more diverse group through are participating in that. Another thing too, as well, is to try to help bring some of that diversity and doing those kind of things is getting organizations to really help provide opportunities for internships or fellowships to organizations. A lot of times you'll see very large health systems promote these type of things, but community health centers, public health entities, entrepreneur groups, if they're able to provide students with those opportunities, it then helps them identify ways forward in education to be able to get through and break some of those paper ceilings that have been kind of holding them back. And again, kind of like Deanna saying, if I see individuals that are of my same ethnicity, of my same background, that have a role that I'm interested in doing and are able to mentor me, it's going to encourage me to go forward a lot more. And I think that's really helping out those early careerists and individuals that are coming back to school to really give them that way forward. So.
Thanks, Jeff. That's really important, and you touched on some really interesting stuff. Jesus, would you like to share anything on perspective from the workforce side and any encouragement you'd offer, call to action for other similar organizations?
Yes, of course. Thank you. One of the things that that I would say is, to the executives and everyone listening to this, I would say, uh, be, go and encourage the younger population. Some of these kids are needing help, and one of the quotes that I love is, help out the person that you used to be. Because I myself, I was one of those kids that needed help, needed guidance, and now being on the other side and being an American citizen, now I see the path, and people want to join our efforts. I mean, please, you're welcome to join it, and it's something that, again, it's a passion, and these young people are hungry, they're passionate, and they're willing and they're able. Just today, I got a phone call from a doctor, and she said, "Hey, Jesus, whatever I need to do, please help me to come to the United States." And I say, "Hey, look, the TN visa. The beautiful thing about the TN visa that I love is that it also has doctors to do either teaching or to do testing, and you can do the same thing with the TN visa, and teaming up with the universities that gives us the opportunity to bring in nurses and then bring in the rest of the professions." So I encourage you guys to look into this or team up with us.
Thanks, Jesus. Rufino, would you like to share a little bit on kind of a policy perspective from where you sit?
Yeah, I think Deanna hit it really, hit the nail on the head with trying to get early exposure to people in the Latino community and just minorities in general. I mean, the statistics that Jeff was citing earlier are it's kind of mind-boggling when you think of how little representation there is in those upper management levels in a lot of these healthcare organizations. You think of a city like Houston, largest medical center in the world, one of the largest Latino populations in the country. How is it that we don't see a lot more Latinos in those leadership roles within these different systems? And a lot of it, is I think tied to the fact that if you don't, as a young student or just a kid, even if you don't see somebody that looks like you in a role out in society, it's a lot harder to actually believe that you can get to that position at some point, right? And so I think my call to action would be to just healthcare organizations in general, like be targeted in your efforts to try to identify those candidates, right? Whether it's doctors or medical directors or VPs within your organization, C-suite level folks, they're out there. Like the Latino population is so big and so diverse in terms of the skill set that we know those folks are out there. Go look for them, find them, and see what difference they can make within your organizations. From a healthcare outcome standpoint, there have been numerous studies done about how much better health outcomes can be when the person treating or interacting with a patient looks a lot like that patient. I mean, you mentioned the example of the Muslim nurse or ER nurse who just had the idea of, oh, maybe this is what's happening with this particular patient. You just get better outcomes. You get probably better patient satisfaction out of those experiences. And it's something that it's a problem, I guess, if you can call it that, that has a very simple solution, right? It's those people are out there. You just need to find them, and maybe you're just not looking in the right places. Expand the scope of where your recruiting efforts are, maybe be a little more targeted towards those efforts, and it's guaranteed to pay dividends.
Right. No, that's so true. It's so true. The patient outcomes are such an important piece of all that and what we're doing, right? We're helping healthcare providers provide services to help people get better. I think that's really important. Cesar, I'd like you to have a maybe parting shot on what you think from a policy perspective.
Sure, yeah. So just to kind of build off of what Rufino said and everyone else, great points. I would just say, take that and reach out to the policymakers, reach out to the regulators, reach out to the lawmakers. The will is there, the desire is there to help, the money's there. I guess I can't say that for all 50 states, but I'm going to assume it's there. It's there. Healthcare is important. Everybody knows that. I actually had somebody today make an argument that the healthcare system is an issue of national security. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's a compelling argument, and folks aren't out there rooting for the healthcare system to just collapse. I mean, I'm not just talking about hospitals here. We all know it's important. We all know it matters. And there are things out there that are overall helpful. Things like interstate compacts. We talk about traveling nurses, whatever it may be. I mentioned here in Texas, we're starting up these additional grant and scholarship opportunities. The will is there. It is. And it's just getting those ideas into the hands and the minds and the thoughts of the people that want to do something and help you guys find those people. I think they're all great ideas, and it's just now connecting all those dots, getting everybody together and kind of getting that momentum. So that's what I would encourage folks to do, is just really, really make a push for that kind of help.
Yeah, thank you, Cesar. And it's so true. I was at a real estate conference this week, healthcare real estate, and they were talking about design and construction, and it was kind of talking about things that are going on in the community. And I was real surprised to hear a lot of the design and development folks talking about how they consider the patient, the outcome, like when they come in, the first impression, having that comfort of the space, feeling inviting, which helps improve quality, healthcare quality outcome. So it's a holistic. There are so many stakeholders. It's a big group that participate and are a part of this system, and that includes us. I'll give the final kind of words here, is that as a healthcare executive, as an attorney, as a Hispanic attorney, first generation attorney, I find it is my duty to mentor younger students, aspiring people who want to move in the healthcare space, or thinking about jobs in the future, and encouraging, like, look, these are opportunities that you can take. If you're good at science, or if you're good at math, these are the career trajectories that you can consider that may never have been considered before. And to not, when you think about costs, when you see people going to major universities, I'm here in Austin, University of Texas, they started school this week, and it can be intimidating because it's like, I don't come from a lot of money, and how do I pay for that? I don't think that's for me, because I'm not at that level, which is so wrong. And those are the things that we need to be breaking down. And if we lose opportunities where we can, forgive some debts, or lower, like, think of ways to lower costs, it is affecting, the amount of people and the diverse people that are entering these educational institutions, the educational spaces, which in turn affect the workers that we have, the skilled workers that, pointed out how important the skills that these people have in these spaces. And on the healthcare executive side too, we need more people in the HR spaces. We need more people in the compliance spaces. We need more diversity, making diverse executives making policy decisions that affect the whole healthcare system in general. So my call to action to all the leaders, to the members of NALHE, to continue being active, be a voice, as Cesar said, be that advocate for your people. Use your position to help others. I didn't get here in a vacuum. There were a lot of helping hands that helped me get here. I'm paying it forward by trying to help others. So I want to go ahead and thank the panel for their time, their experience, and everything they had to share with us today. It was a great one. I think we learned quite a bit, and we'll be in touch soon to talk about things as they develop over the next year or so, and we can reconnect. And I want to thank NALHE and the leadership for hosting us, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you so much.